Hello, everyone. Happy Halloween. Well, today is the 31st of October, and I think what I want to do is I want to talk about art. Let's talk about art, ladies and gentlemen. Why not? Let's do it again. So I talk on art, and I'm about art, and I start by saying a quote from a famous artist. And here we go. Our next quote is from Antonio Canova. Born in 1752, died 1822. I have read that the ancients, when they produced a sound, used to modulate it, heightening and lowering its pitch without departing from the rules of harmony. So must the artist do in working at the nude. I'm not quite sure I understand this particular quote. Well, first of all, it's something he's read. We know that. He reads that the ancients, when they produced a sound, used to modulate it, heightening and lowering its pitch without departing from the rules of harmony. Yeah, so I think he's talking about ideals. The ancients held onto certain ideals about form, like the Greek and Roman sculptors. And this is an exhortation from Mr. Canova about when people work at the nude. That is, I imagine, on works that involve nudes, that they maintain a discipline. They can be creative. In fact, they can, say, modulate it, heightening and lowering the pitch. They can certainly do that. They can modulate within a certain range, right? Though the focus is applying and conforming to the rules of harmony. The rules of harmony. So I'm thinking he's talking about the rules of things like proportion, rules relating to beauty, things like this. Like, I've heard about things like the golden ratio, certain ideals, and I appreciate this in very much the same way. I appreciate this quote very much the same way that I appreciated Mark Twain's quote. He talked about how important it is to was it be legible? Was that the one I was interested in? Oh no, it wasn't that. It was Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about how a painter should give the suggestion of a fairer creation than we know. That's right, Mark Twain. Emerson was talking about that. And in this case, I think this author is talking about it as well. He's talking about the ancients and how they applied their understanding of what's beautiful in their artwork. And they did it from, as they went from piece to piece. And another exhortation about, how art should be produced. I appreciate it because it asks the artist to reach for ideals, and it asks that the artist bring out the best in himself through his skill and bring out the best in the object that's being reproduced. According to customary, long-standing, ancient understanding of what constitutes beauty. Again, it's one of these aesthetic standards, sort of like the aesthetic, and focusing on the aesthetic. And I can appreciate that. A funny thing, at the same time that I appreciate Canova's and Emerson's exhortations to sort of bring out the ideals, and express the ideals through their work, through a person's work, I can also see the opposite. And, it may be that the opposite would be less than interesting. I mean, it's very possible. I mean, Greek statues are recognizable for a reason, right? Because there's a perfection about them. And, I mean, I see it. And I love going to them, like, as in my mind's eye, as a standard, like, that's something to pay attention to. And it was part of what made their sculptures recognizable, is the focus on the ideal. And I've seen sort of emphasis about that through the years. I mean, when I was younger, when I was like a teenager, I used to read Ayn Rand, and her focus was on the heroic person, right? And it was her basically her hat tipping to romanticism. And I can't speak against that tendency, really, because I myself am moved by the ideal. I myself am moved by the romantic. And think about all those movie makers who write and produce and direct and act in movies like that the Hallmark Channel produces. This is like a romantic ideal, these stories, these romance stories. It goes beyond love, right? Certainly, in romanticism. But it does sort of reach for ideals, values, and, I know that people individually, from a psychological standpoint, also are very interested in supporting values and reaching for them. It's really sort of like the essence of wisdom literature. It's the essence of personal development and the personal development movement of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So, there's a lot to be said about seeking out the ideal in one's work and in one's life. Like I mentioned, for both Emerson and Canova, that is definitely an important trait, to develop in yourself. That is, the ability to pursue those values and support those values. And that's an exhortation that's been sort of laid on the table for millennia. That's how human beings live and thrive. And we reach for our conceptual ideals every day. I know I try to do the same. And also we compare ourselves to the ideals quite often. And that's where it gets a little tricky sometimes, because, sometimes a performance doesn't meet the ideal. It doesn't. And people can be rather severe with themselves and with others when people are not hitting the mark, and it's clear. Though beyond that, I mean, I wouldn't ask for anyone to sort of not pursue the ideal. So, but here's the difficult part, and it relates to beauty. You know, on some level, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I guess what I mean by that is that there are individualistic characteristics that are important to preserve, that may not be necessarily ideal. You know, one example is today. Today's the holiday Halloween. Now, what is it that makes Halloween so special? Well, there's a lot of things that make Halloween special. But, one of the things that make Halloween special is, well, first of all, like, surprise. Yeah. And, horror. And that is certainly less than ideal. Quite often, when things don't go right, when things go wrong, like death, dying, and disease. But this holiday is kind of all about when things go wrong and things go bad, and they go really bad. I was watching I was looking at like, I don't know, some social media post or something, and I saw someone, they had they had a pretty gruesome costume, but it was, I don't know if it was approaching some ideal, maybe some Halloween ideal. I don't know. It's pretty goofy, pretty disturbing to look at, really. And so, it was notable to me, certainly. I recall it immediately. And maybe, I don't know, they certainly were not depicting themselves as in the greatest of health. And you know what? Not everybody's dressed up as a superhero on Halloween. Not everybody. There are quite a few zombies, right? There are quite a few folks that, I mean, a lot of people can take it pretty far on Halloween. And so, it's not always, I don't know, it's not always what attracts. The ideal perfect thing is not always what attracts. Sometimes people are repelled by it. And, and they want to get behind it, especially in American culture. We like to tear down our superstars and movie stars and famous people. In a way, that's kind of like this a common cultural sporting event where there are takedowns, and there are some pretty serious takedowns. And there are aspects of takedown that are virtuous too. That's for sure. It's really interesting to me, really just how much of life is contextual. It's often all about perspective. And so I guess what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily clear what represents the ideal. It just isn't. It can be in culture. Sometimes culture is really coherent. But other times culture is not as coherent as we'd like. And so, sometimes it's unclear. Anyway, I guess that's okay. We are, after all, in pursuit of the perfect, the ideal, but there's also something fake about it, something inauthentic about perfection. And a lot of people put a lot of energy into striving for it every day. And it's not always clear that it's worth it sometimes. Sometimes the means don't justify the ends. Or sometimes, there's like a, there's a sort of a loss that happens. I forget what the phrase is, but you sort of, the more you pursue something, the more energetically you do. Sometimes there's a trade-off that doesn't work for you, and it's not very useful in a lot of ways. So yeah, I don't know if it's so I guess the question is, let's say one produces a sculpture or painting that doesn't represent the ideal, or doesn't necessarily pursue the ideal of the aesthetic ideal, but maybe we even work against that slightly. Maybe be a little chaotic, right? Maybe there's a piece of art that has that's less purposeful, maybe less meaningful, maybe even less beautiful. I guess what that artist might be risking is someone not buying it. But not all artists are in the market to sell their work. You know, a lot of artists are doing art to express themselves. You know, I'm sure part of that expression is sort of describing what it is to sort of not meet a standard, and maybe even act against the standard, or even have no standard at all. You know, it's kind of interesting when it comes to standards. You sort of you give power to the standards when you recognize them, when you produce art that it's in alignment with those standards. But those standards, they will have less and less power over time if you pay less attention to them. And in society, that happens. Sometimes we're sort of we lose sight of certain standards in certain ways. Anyway, I guess that is somewhat interesting. But I guess there is always this sort of conflict between like the real and the ideal. And you know, how far should we go to pursue that? Should the ideal be a part of every piece of art? Should we all strive to write the great American novel? You know, it's kind of tricky when it comes to art. It kind of depends on what the purpose of the artist is. You know, what is the artist's purpose? And I guess what I'm saying, it's probably just impossible to overgeneralize or to generalize. It might be impossible to generalize. And so maybe that's why words are failing me. That's why I don't have concepts to describe it, because we just can't generalize about art and its purpose. I mean, we can certainly, but I don't think we can generalize and be accurate. Because one of the things that I appreciate about art is its fluidity. You know, it's always flowing. It reminds me of the fashion industry. You know, when it comes to decorating people, and even decorating homes, businesses, cities, there are trends. It's so fluid. It's flowing. It's ever changing. And so there's always room for novelty. Novelty pops up here and there. That's part of what makes it exciting. So to create like guardrails on either side of art by saying that, I don't know, artists and artworks are best created in the furtherance of certain historical art standards of aesthetics. It just sounds I think this is probably why these artists even talk about the subject at all, because it is so challenging. And I appreciate the sentiment, and I'm grateful for everything that these aesthetic standards have given us. But there's a point where we all just get tired of it. We want a buffet. We want 31 flavors ice cream. We want to be surprised or intrigued by something that's different. I mean, what if everything was the same and every artist strove to be a certain kind of artist? Yeah, that just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But I appreciate it as a rule of thumb, certainly for beginning artists or for artists that are struggling to find a source, right? A source of inspiration. And maybe that's all these are. These are just sparks of inspiration for some. The less prescriptive, maybe less normative, but more appearing. Maybe it acknowledges just subtly the authentic self. I'm sure these authors did that. And they honor the authentic self as much as everyone does. I mean, and here's the thing. A lot of these quotations that I'm talking are sort of snippets, right? They're bits and pieces of an artist's larger work. And, it might be notable to that this particular quote, stood out among the body of work, but I have a feeling, sometimes we can take quotes out of context, and sometimes we have selection bias, and so we end up with the same thing again and again. But it is kind of interesting. It is definitely interesting to contemplate, the contrast between subjective and objective artistic beauty. It's just not clear. The universe doesn't give us the golden key to unlock all the secrets. One thing I'm appreciating, and this is a point that I made a couple of videos ago, it was just how willing the universe is, how generous the universe is to give artists free hand to create whatever they desire. And that's pretty true. I mean, within certain limits, right, of height, weight, dimension, and even cultural prohibitions, like taboo subjects and things like that. Generally, the artist has got a free hand. In fact, that's, I think, one of the more troubling, even existential type qualities to art. And that is that artists have so much freedom. Say, producing a song. So, I can imagine in the 3D space, in the 3D volume of every kind of song imaginable, what would an artist create? I have a feeling we've pretty much run the gamut on a lot of just practically made sounds. I mean, they're just sounds. I mean, as a form of art, that's an interesting canvas, first of all. Basically, it has to do with pressure variations. How many different kinds of pressure variations are there? Well, there's an infinite number of pressure variations, in a time series. I mean, and how many different kinds of pressure variations have human beings recorded and then called it art? Probably a lot of different kinds. Now, I acknowledge, since there are certainly an unlimited number of pressure variations or sonic variations, I'm sure we have barely scratched the surface. I mean, a lot of songs are 3 to 5 minutes long. If we take the entire continuum in the universe, we might have a song that lasted forever. Where's the song that lasts forever, that's infinitely high and infinitely low, that's either infinitely high or infinitely low, or infinitely loud, these infinite amplitude, I don't hear that song very often. And I can appreciate not hearing that song. There's certain limitations. I like to think that human beings are pretty advanced, but if you look at the whole scheme of things, we're really just getting started. And there's a question about whether we'll be able to continue into the future, even 20 to 50 years, if you ask me. We're doing pretty good so far, but there are definitely struggles for human civilization that we're going through right now. And will until the very end. Yeah. So I'm really glad that I've had a chance to talk to you about this subject. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that I'll be able to add any more light or shed any more light on the subject than perhaps you've already considered. I think part of what makes art beautiful is just how indescribable it is, how undefined it is or can be. I've talked about living life as being a form of art, an art creation, something as broad as that. And I've talked about something as narrow as, I don't know, probably an atom's movement from one point to another. There are broad and narrow definitions of what art is. Large and small. Who knows? Maybe the universe is one big artwork. I wouldn't be surprised about that at all. In some respects, it is. An infinite series of infinitely short artworks that are infinitely large. Now that's an artwork for sure. Excuse me. I guess I'm getting a little tired, so maybe I'll just wrap up this video a little bit. Yeah, part of what makes art so intriguing is that it is a word that really can be applied to almost anything. Even my little pumpkin up there on the shelf. Even the way I'm speaking to you right now. I mean, your life and my life. The universe as a whole. Yeah. That art as a concept is something pretty amazing. Absolutely. It is absolutely amazing. And what's so cool too is that we get to choose. We get to choose what art we see. What art we pay attention to. And in a way, we are the most powerful. We're some of the most powerful folks. I mean, if you think about it now, I have access through the internet, through nearly all the knowledge in the world, through, say, Wikipedia, or all the music that's ever been produced through YouTube, say, or who knows. I mean, there's so much music out there. And all the visual art that has ever been produced, pretty much that's been recorded, right? And then with AI, I've got access to, again, modifications of all that knowledge, all that video, and all that sound. I mean, to an infinite level. I mean, really, there's almost no limit to the resources that our brain has access to in terms of art in those fields. And so we live in an amazing time for artistry. An amazing time. I'll tell you what, all the artists that in the past that you have admired, I don't know, Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, any artist today has access to all of the artists that have ever existed in history right now. No artist has ever had the ability to be influenced by so many different historical artworks. We have every artist has the potential to be influenced by nearly every artist, every other artist that has ever lived, that is living now and that has ever lived. That kind of attention, like that sector that artists have access to in order to gain inspiration, and just individual audience members too, that has never happened before. The font of inspiration for art is now more powerful and larger than it's ever been in human history. And as an artist, and addressing my fellow artists, I think we live in the most wonderful time ever to be an artist. The most wonderful time ever. And on that note, I'm going to stop. Have a good night, everybody.